We touched on this subject in an earlier animation tutorial, but it's worth coming back to, I think, in a bit more detail, because this is the basis of some great effects, and at least one of those we're going to be doing a little later, the 3D book. A child walking down the street holding the hand of a parent goes where the parent goes, and that's all we mean here. If we animate an image and then we want another image to follow the same animation, then we effectively get them to hold hands in the parent and child relationship, and the child follows where the parent goes. Let's take a look at a quick example here. As you can see from the file list above, I've already got the background image I want to use, which is the lemurs, and we're going to use the other two. Just before I open the lemurs up into the objects and animation screen, I'm going to give myself a little bit of working time. I'm going to just guess at the slide duration, knowing that I can always drop it back a little bit later. So for the moment, I'm going to put 20 seconds into there, select my lemurs and open them into the objects and animation screen. Now when they open up, we generally see the keyframe created for us, and we also usually see this bounding box. If I wanted to make a child of this background, in other words make a parent and child relationship with the background as the parent, then all I would need to do is to leave that selected and add an image. But we're going to do that with the two insets. Here I need them separate, so I'm going to click into the grey area, add an image, and we'll select the heron first. Need this image to be a little smaller, so I'm going to drop it down, just guessing at the size for the moment. That should do us nicely, I think. Now let's assume I want to bring this image onto the screen from the left hand side, left bottom, bottom top, anywhere I choose. Doesn't really matter for the sake of this particular exercise. But I do need to decide where this keyframe needs to be. And if I'm going to be using a background, I find that it's more attractive if I allow the background to fade on screen without any inserts in place. Then give it a couple of seconds before things start to happen, which means the heron's first keyframe needs to be around 4 seconds. Nothing cast in stone, as you probably know. I'm going to drop the size of my images down just a little bit, and I'm going to suggest that at the first keyframe I'm going to use click and drag here because I've just got one image. I'm going to click and drag this off the screen, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit and put it up at the top. What I now want is about 4 or 5 seconds for this to float down into the position I want it. So my next keyframe needs to go at the 9-second point. 5 seconds plus 4. What I'll do on this occasion, I think, is just put my cursor there and hit the insert key. Remember though, if we hit the insert key, none of these options will be turned on. We'll need to turn on the ones we want. But let's set it up first of all. I'm quite close there, but let's make sure we get it bang on 9 seconds. So between this point and this point, I want this image to float down onto the screen. Where do I want it? Well, I think I'll have it something like that. That looks okay. We'll eventually put the child somewhere down here at a slightly different angle. So we need a test, I suppose. Let's just put the cursor at that point. I'll hit the space bar, and there you can see the image that floats down into the position I want it. Looks okay, maybe a bit slow, but I'll make a judgment on that as we go through. I think what I'll also do is to add a bit of style to this, but I could wait until I get the next image in place and we can do them both together. So what do I want to do next? If that's the animation, what I need now is a child of the parent. So I'm going to select my heron. We can see the bounding box around the edge. And if we look into the box here, we can see how PicturesToExe shows us both the heron icon and the lemurs icon. We can see they're separate. But if I were to either right click the heron and add an image or go up to the add image icon at the top left, doesn't matter what, it's going to add the image in a different way in that box on the right. So when I do that and select the red panda, you can see exactly what happens. Not only is it taken on the same size, it's also taken on exactly the same animation. In fact, it's covering up the image that we first viewed, but of course we need to adjust that slightly. But you can see quite clearly that it's now a child of the heron, which is the parent. But I can still move the panda. Now I'm going to use the pan controls here. I'm going to bring the image down. I want to rotate it a little bit the other way. And I'm going to pan it across and down, something like that. Gone a bit too far, so I'll go back there. That's what I sort of had in mind as the parent and child relationship. And of course, once we've got the two images in place, then we can make some embellishments with a thin line around the outer edge. Let's do that by selecting both the panda and the heron. Holding the control key, I can select both. Now I can go to my properties and I can select a border. I don't want anything quite as big as that, so we'll look at this in pixels, I think, and I'll go down to about 10 pixels, and I may even click the color and take it down to off-white, which still makes the edge of the image show up nicely, especially if I click into the grey area. You can see the edge of the image is picked out nicely, but it's not in our face, is it? Now, reselecting the heron and the red panda, I can go to my shadow options and tick to apply a little bit of a shadow. So you'll notice that I've done nothing with the red panda apart from simply move it, because the animation is locked to the heron. The heron is the parent, the red panda is the child. So let's put the cursor back at the start. In fact, let's go out of the objects and animation screen, and we'll look at this right from the start. Just press play and we'll watch it in the mini player. And sometimes when you're doing this sort of work, and there you can see an error straight away, when you're doing this sort of work, it's not a bad idea to have an image either side, even if you were just doing a few tests. But there you can see how the child follows the parent. But it's clear we've got a little bit of an adjustment to make. Where do we make the adjustment? Well, just the parent. That's all we have to move. So let's go back to the objects and animation screen. There's the little area of the image that we need to remove. So we need to make sure we pick up the first keyframe of the parent, which is our heron, and we need to decide what we're going to do. Are we going to just move it a little bit more to the left, or are we going to rotate it a little bit more, or a little bit of both, as I've just done? And if we come out of this again and press play, there we have our parent and child relationship. The two images just drifting on screen together, but of course here we have two images, but we could have a lot more than that if we needed them. Well, that's okay for starters, but to finish this off, of course, we would need to include some speed, wouldn't we? So we need to identify the heron once again, because we don't have to worry about the speed of the panda. The panda's going to take the speed of the parent. But we've got 5 seconds here, and the animation starts off screen. So I think we could safely use the slow down option. But when you think what we're doing with this, we're rotating and we're panning, and we're not changing the zoom, so we could leave that, I suppose, but certainly we're panning and rotating, so we need to firstly identify the first keyframe that's controlling that section of the animation. Go to the pan, add modifier, animation and slow down, and as I said, we can skip the zoom and go to the rotate and do the same there. But before we actually look at that, we can do something with the background too, because it's all part and parcel of animation. If I select the background lemurs so I can see the keyframe for them too, I know that at this point these are going to start to come on screen. So what we would normally think of doing is maybe adding a keyframe down here with the lemurs, and I'll hit insert, and between this and the next keyframe, which I'll insert again, we could have the background going soft and making sure that the inset images stand out nicely. So let's do that. So from this point the image needs to be sharp, but at this point we need to make it soft. So the first thing we need to do really is to turn on the blur controls. So let's turn on the blur controls from there, and also I think we'll use the opacity, and we'll go to that point and we'll turn on the blur and opacity again. But now we can add the blur, we can add the opacity, darken it a bit so that shows up. That looks okay. So let's go back to the start and see how that looks, but let's look at it in the mini player again, because I think we get a better view of it there. Pressing play, and away we go. One of the things we may need to adjust is when the background goes soft. Parent and child relationship is working perfectly, but I don't know if you agree, but I think that when you look at this critically, the background is going soft too quickly. Before we really catch sight of the two images coming on, the image is going soft. We find this quite a lot, or I found this quite a lot. Go back into the Objects and Animation screen, because what you really need to do is maybe stagger these two. You could decide to have a smaller gap, but sometimes it just works better if things are staggered a little bit. And I'll run this from that point here. So there you can see the softness doesn't really start to kick in until the pictures are almost coming to a rest. It just looks a little nicer on the eye. And we've created parent and child animation. Now in the animation world of PicturesToExe, our parent object, in our case the image of the heron, we can apply as many children to that as we have need for. Audiovisual and animation is a creative topic, so it's not unusual at all for us to create animation like we have here, and within minutes of completing it we want to see a slight change. No problem with that at all, but here's a tip I can offer. Immediately save the project file that you've been working on, so whatever change you make to the animation, if it works out, then save it under a different name. In my case here I would save it as parent and child, but then if I made a change I may save it as parent and child too. But making these changes is quite normal, and you can expect to want to do that quite a bit. No problem with our parent and child. But there's one other thing I can say here which starts to drift off the subject a little bit, but it's worth slotting in, I think. Anytime you make a mistake with an animation and it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do, it's probably caused by one of two things. You've either forgotten to select the right image on the right hand side here, so when you start working on a keyframe, you're actually working on a keyframe for a different image to the one you intend to animate. The other issue is selecting the right image on the right hand side but not selecting the right keyframe. For example, I've got the second keyframe of my parent animation selected. If this needed any speed options, if I applied speed to that, it wouldn't affect the image at all because it has to be applied to this one. So whenever I make a mistake with my animation and something goes wrong, it's generally one of those two things. But it's actually quick and easy to make a change or a derivative of what we've just created. Let's select the heron, the second of the two keyframes. Let's assume for a moment we're happy where the animation starts, but we'd like it to come down in a more formal way. So if I went to my rotate options and double click the C, I can set my heron back level, ignore the red panda for a moment. I can use the pan controls to position the image top left of the frame where I think it's appropriate. Then I can select my red panda. I don't have to worry about a keyframe here because it's only got one, and when I select it, it's automatically highlighted. But it's a child of the parent, so all I need to do here is just to straighten up the rotation and use the pan controls to put this in a similar position bottom right as the other image has top left. And you can always put your cursor in the box and use the up and down arrows. Sometimes that works a little bit better. So to bring this video to a close, let's take a look at our derivative. And you're likely to spot a deliberate mistake, because remember, when we rotated the red panda, we rotated the red panda on screen as you see it now, forgetting that it's going to affect where the image comes onto the screen. But very quick and easy to put right. Just select the image, go back to the Objects and Animation screen, go back to the heron, the starting point, and there we can see the issue. So here we need maybe even a little more rotation and or a little more pan just to clear the background image. Although we're creating animation and custom transitions as our main subject here, what we've created with these three images would make a pretty good slide style. So I've just created one of those. I'm using my lemurs, the background, as main object 1 because all three of these need to form a part of the slide style. Heron, which is the next image on, I've set it as image 2, and panda is image 3. So all we need to do then is to create the slide style as we demonstrated in the previous set of videos. Now of course any slide style we create requires 3 images, so as you can see I've dropped 3 new images into the slide list. So we need to use the control key to select all 3. Go to the slide style. I called it parent and child and animals. There we can see a representation, and when I hit apply, then I've got exactly the same as we had before. I'll just quickly run that for a little while so we can just be reassured that everything works the same. The background should go soft. There it goes, and the images come to a rest. Now you will find that slide style with the download, so if you want to try it on your own images, at least you'll see it at its very best. In the main video, parent and child animation, I realized when I listened to the video myself that I missed an important point. We placed the inset image off screen, and we decided we was going to hit the insert key to bring a keyframe in roughly around the 9-second point. And I said, don't forget, when you just insert a keyframe, none of the animation options are turned on, which they would be if we cloned it. But of course, if we use click and drag, although you can see none of those turned on, and as soon as I click and drag this on, because I'm panning, you can see the panning is turned on and the values automatically appear. But then of course when I rotate, then the rotate automatically turns on, so we don't have to worry about physically ticking the box when we're clicking and dragging. But if we were going to, let's say, zoom this image, and I wanted to do it from here, then I've got to turn it on first, and then I've got the opportunity to zoom.